Hi, everybody. What we're going to do today is I'm going to introduce to you the Crucible. That's our next unit. And so, what I want to focus on is kind of talking about the historical background of the play, talk about the author a little bit, and specifically talk about a number of different themes and things that play in the course of the story that we're going to be talking about throughout our study of it. All that being said, as you work your way through this, there's going to be an ed puzzle, so there'll be questions you'll have to answer that will go in as a quiz grade. So be sure that you're completing that in a timely manner, so you get those points. Okay, so here we go. So the Crucible, part one of this is just an overview of the text, and so it's an American play. All right, so it's written by Arthur Miller. He's an American playwright. It's written in the 1950s, and it's the story, or I'm sorry, the play is meant to be an allegory in a number of ways. So an allegory is really, it's a story that's representative of another event or relates to another event. And so in this case, the Crucible, which is about residents of Salem, Massachusetts during the Salem witch trials, that story is an allegory for what happened in the United States during the 50s and 60s and 70s, in particular with regards to the Red Scare and the Cold War. All right. Now, there's also a number of issues at play here and things that we'll talk about, specifically the ideas of greed, guilt, motivation, and morality. Now, so like I said, it's an American play. And so 1950s drama and writing, especially for Arthur Miller, was really influenced by a number of things. So World War II had just ended. People were tired of war, especially those who were in like their 40s and 50s. They had lived through two world wars in a matter of 20 years. And so people were tired of it and wanted change. And so there was a large, like it says here, desire to change. And so during the 50s, this is where we really start to see America becoming more and more modern. And so, people were going through feelings of guilt and trying to figure out their own identity at the time. People are in a state of shock, even though we had won it. And so the desire to change and just kind of settle down is there. And so this play itself premieres in 1953 in New York City. So here's a video of Arthur Miller. Go ahead and pause me and watch the video and just come back. Excuse me. So let's talk about Arthur Miller then. So he is born in 1915 in New York City. His father owned a business which failed because of the Great Depression. And his family is forced to move around a lot because of that. And they're trying to settle down, find their way, make a new life for themselves, make sure that they're financially stable. And they're successful enough, or they make it enough to where, or Arthur Miller makes it enough to where he's able to attend the University of Michigan. And so once he's done at Michigan, he returns to New York City, but has no luck with writing, which is ironic because he's a famous writer. But he finally gains some luck or achieves success with writing plays. And so his first play to go on Broadway was All My Sons. And then in 1949, he wrote the famous Death of a Salesman. Now, personally, he was married to Marilyn Monroe, lucky guy. All right, but they divorced after a few years. Altogether, he was married 3 times. Like I mentioned earlier, he writes The Crucible in the 50s, and as a result of writing that play, he is deemed to be a communist. and he died in 2005. Now, let's talk about the play. So, the setting of the play is Salem, Massachusetts. So it's located on the coast of Massachusetts. It's a famous settlement for infamous reasons. And so it was settled mainly by Puritans in 1626. Now, in order to understand what's going on in the play and what's happening with the ideas of witchcraft and things like that, you have to understand a little bit about the Puritans and who they are. They left England so they could freely practice their religion. And they were a very strict group of people, religiously speaking. And so they let their religious beliefs guide everything that they did. Now, imagine this. Okay, let's say that you're a Catholic like me. Now, a lot of Catholics do this, but a lot of us fall short. Um, let's say you let the church's teaching guide everything that you did. Okay, so you'd be pretty strict with your religion, but that's how the Puritans were, and so that would affect them in a number of avenues in interacting with other people, interacting with people above them, and certainly dealing with things in terms of law. Now, that city, Salem, is best known for the infamous Salem witch trials in 1692, which is kind of the premise of the play. Now, so like I mentioned earlier, there's a number of issues or ways or themes that you can look at this play. So among those are the following. So greed, guilt, motivation, and morality. Greed, guilt, motivation, and morality. Now there's more, but I'm going to focus on these four for right now. So let's talk about greed first and foremost. So greed is something that really could mean different things to different people. So think about this for a second. Like, how would you define greed in your mind? So for me, it's greed is accumulating as much wealth and things as you possibly can, without any regard for people around you. Okay. Um, Now that's in terms of money and items. You could also talk about greed in terms of power, in terms of influence, in terms of sometimes people say athletes are greedy because they want to be better and be the best player on their team. Now, you have to ask yourself: is greed ever good? Is greed ever good? Um, and just depending on what your viewpoint is would depend on how you answer the question, or maybe what you're talking about would depend on how you answer the question. So some of these things you're going to answer in a short answer, so I don't want to give you too much here, but keep this in mind. Like if you're really greedy because you want to accumulate money and wealth for your family, is it a bad thing? Maybe to you it is, maybe to some it isn't. It's really depends on who you are and what you think. Guilt. So, what leads people to feel guilty? I'm one of these people personally who feels guilt a lot. All right. Like I'll do something or say something, run in my mouth, and then 5 minutes later, I feel really bad for what I said. So, I think what leads people to feeling guilty is their sense of morality and what kind of guides them, what their moral compass is, or what their conscience tells them. All right. Motivation. So, this one is a big one for me. So, people are motivated by a number of different things. It could be money, it could be fame, it could be clout, um, different things of how to be known, or how to stick out in the crowd. So what motivates really me personally is doing what's best for my family. That might be yours as well, or maybe doing right by your family. And so we all have different things that motivate us, and depending on whatever we're doing. Finally, there's morality. So if we were doing this in class, we would talk about kind of what our moral rules are. So we all have like this different code, unless we're a complete sociopath. We all have a code that we live by, and things that or the way we want to be portrayed, or the way we want to do things for other people. And so those would be our moral rules, like things we believe in, that we should be doing in order to be the best person that we can be. Now, all in all, you have to consider, how do these ideas and questions all fit into our ideas of America? So Arthur Miller is really critical of the United States. He is a communist himself, and he disagrees with the way that, or disagreed with the way that that our government did its business and treated its people. So we have to think about these things in terms of what our country kind of stands for. So, does our country stand for greed? Is America kind of founded on greed? What about guilt? Like, a lot of people feel guilty for things that they do in the United States? What are our motivations as Americans? What do we want to accomplish? What motivates us to be better citizens? And then finally, what's our morality as a nation? What do we look like as a nation morally? And so, again, this class is about American literature, and so I want to make these connections um, between the text and between the way that we live our life. And so, make sure that we're thinking about these things as we go through. Now, so let's talk about the Salem witch trials in general. You can pause me again. Guess not. Okay. So, the Salem witch trials occurred in a 3-month span, so between June and September of 1692 in Salem, Massachusetts. And so, as I mentioned, the Puritans were the group of people involved in the trials, and the people in town were in a state of hysteria about witches and evil. So that means that they were consumed by this idea that there was witchcraft going on, that there was evil present, and it occupied a lot of their time and thinking, especially as it pertains to their fellow Salemite. Okay, so here's the facts, and so the play is based on a true story. So the facts are these. So a young girl named Betty Paris, you'll see this at the beginning of the play, becomes ill. So she's a fever, extreme pain, running around the house. More children then in Salem also fall ill: Ann Putnam, Mercy Lewis, and Mary Walcott. So doctors, uh, you know, logically, were called in to find the reason for their sickness, but the doctors couldn't explain it. So they just default to, they got to be witches. All right. So Matt, think about this today. Something is wrong with you. You don't know what it is. You go to the doctor. They say, oh, we don't know. You must be a witch. That's basically what's going on here. So because there is not of as informed of people, that's a nice way of saying, putting it, that they were easily convinced that that was the truth. So, I mean, again, especially at that time, but even still today, if a doctor says something, we generally take it as solid fact, and so the townspeople at that time would have done the same. A servant in town is also accused of witchcraft. We'll get to that. And so the townspeople decide to arrest that servant, whose name is Tituba, and who is an older woman, and accuse her of being a witch because these girls were seen with her. Now, more and more people, as a result of accusations and charges, are arrested and charged with being a witch. And so the punishment was death by hanging. And so in order to live, some people just confess, say, yeah, I'm a witch. I'm a wizard. I did it. Please save me. Don't hang me. Okay. Now, on the other hand, some people refuse to lie. And so 19 men and women were put to death for witchcraft by hanging. And one man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death. So they piled stone upon stone upon stone onto him until he died. Okay. Now, why did all this happen? So people in general at the time, and you could make the case today too, were very suspicious and very fearful of of other people. And so a book about witchcraft had just been published by this man named Cotton Mather. There was war with Native Americans going on constantly. And so death and evil and darkness were on the minds of many all the time because it was constantly around them. And disease was prevalent. Okay. And so Puritan culture easily, because it's so religious in nature, accepts the devil as the source of evil, of everything evil and wrong with life. Okay. So something goes wrong, you get sick, must be the devil. Somebody dies, devil's fault. Evils abound, devil's fault. We're at war, must be the devil dealing with or intervening. Okay. So that was the common go-to blame game, was to blame the devil. All right. Now, some other more logical explanations for why all this happened, or why people got carried away in talking about evil and witchcraft, were simply teenage boredom. Okay. They were bored and got carried away. So at the time, dancing, flirting, etc., not allowed. All right. All the accusers were teenage girls. That might have some play here. All right. Some of the accusers were just simply jealous people. So it's an easy way to get rid of people you don't like. Hey, just say Billy's a wizard and Billy will die. It's an easy way to get rid of people, as bad as that sounds. And then generally, and I tend to be in this camp, there's a sense of there's a general sense of depression. So they came here, the Puritans came here from another country. Things aren't going well. They're not rich. They're not happy. They're not in a good spot. They're not as free as they would like to be. And so, kind of all these things put together just leads to brewing into a bad circumstance. Let's talk about some of the historical context then. So, this kind of goes into the allegorical connections. So I talked about at the beginning how this is an allegory for the Red Scare and the Cold War era thoughts of anti-communism. So some people during the 1930s are going to turn to ideas of communism because they're out of a job. And so the Great Depression leaves many people upset about the government. A lot of people lost basic things that everybody deserves: food, clothing, shelter. And the theory of communism, communist theory, offers all of those things. So it says, hey, everybody's the same. We all have as much as we need, and we all share the burden of making sure that everybody has what they need. In theory, that all sounds fine and nice. In practice, this has never worked. It's never worked. Okay. But you could see the appeal, especially if you were really suffering. Let me give you a personal example. My grandparents were both born in 1924. Or I'm sorry, my grandpa on my mom's side was born in 1923. My grandma was born in 1924. And my grandpa's family had 9 kids. And so by the time he was 9 years old, both of his parents died. And so, as a result of that, his oldest sister who was 18, had to take care of all the kids. Imagine being a year older than you are now and raising 9 kids or 8 other kids. Crazy to think about, right? Okay. But that's just what people did. Now imagine also if you had to do that or, vouch for those kids financially. There's no way, especially today. All right, there'd be no way. So people were looking for a place to turn in terms of, we need to take care of each other, take care of ourselves, take care of our family. And to them, theoretically speaking, communism offered that promise. Okay. And so by 1939, which is about 10 years after the start of the Great Depression, 50,000 Americans were communists, okay, and became a major party in the United States. Now, then we go to war, 1941. So we begin fighting against Germany and Japan and Italy and others. And communism was seen as un-American because of the surge in patriotism, which is kind of ironic because we were allies with the Soviet Union during World War II, which is a communist nation at that time. So long story short, we win World War II. We've defeated German fascism, which was an oppressive government led by one man in charge. In Germany's case, it was Hitler. And then we need a new enemy. So our new enemy then became the Soviet Union. Okay. So again, during the 50s, excuse me, during the 50s, the Soviet Union is emerging, and so is the United States economically. And so our main competition at the time was Russia, the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, like I just mentioned, was communist. So we're in this constant state of competition with each other in terms of space travel, nuclear weapons development, and all in all, in essence, government style and governmental style, and how, it's basically a fight for democracy. Okay. So we're dealing with them in the name of democracy, trying to keep that as intact as we possibly can. And because we don't want to lose our way of life. Think about this in today's context. Today, I would say that our biggest I don't know if enemy is the right term, but threat, I would say, is China. So China is extremely advanced. They've got things going on. They're a communist country, but they do communism kind of in a different way. So governmentally and how they treat their citizens, big time communists. How they run their economy, big time capitalist. Okay, and so but we're in constant competition with them in a number of different avenues, especially technologically. And some people are predicting that they'll pass us up in the next 50 years, and we will no longer be the sole power in the world. And so these are things that are at play today, and things that have been dealt with over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. That we're coming to the realization that we're almost in a new Cold War. Okay. Now, so as a result of the Cold War and our fighting with the Soviet Union, no shots are fired. Okay. But there's effects of hysteria. So people start to freak out and think, oh, hey, any day now we're going to be in a nuclear war with Russia. And so the effects of that led to a number of different things, especially how people were living their life. So this is a underground bomb shelter that would have been built. There's a Red Scare. Okay, so red is the color of communism. That's i.e. Red Scare. And so the symbol of communism is a hammer and sickle. And so that's basically saying that work, makes everything go. So a hammer and a sickle is like farming and industry tied together into one. All right. Now, so because of all that, Joseph McCarthy, a senator from Wisconsin, and the House Committee on Un-American Activities joined forces in order to expose any communists that are making waves in the United States. And so that committee would bring in and question Americans who are suspected of being a communist. And so thousands of people are called to testify. And the goal of that committee was to seek out and basically expose as many communists as possible. Joseph McCarthy, like I mentioned, was the head of this, and he claims that he has a list of over 200 people in the government who were communists, and he becomes the poster child for this movement. Now, who would be most likely to be suspected of being a communist? Filmmakers, directors, actors were all accused of attending communist meetings. Politicians were also targeted. And so you have to ask, well, why people in the media? Why people in politics? Those are people who are in the biggest positions of influence at that time. Okay. Today it'd be a little more tougher. Back then, film industry was huge, and people really looked up to people in that industry. And, basically, and with it being a form of media, they're influencing a lot of different people through their work. So by going after them, it's going to be easier to um, take down those who are suspected to be, communists. Okay. Politicians are also going to be exposed. If you're a political rival of someone, it'd be probably a good idea if you said that they were probably a communist, because then you would get reelected and people would go against them. Now, again, just like the Salem witch trials, you had a couple options. One was you just admit being a communist. Say, yeah, hey, Joe McCarthy, yeah, I'm a communist. And here's some other people I know of who are communists. Or you could refuse to admit anything, or to refuse to rat anybody out, and you're just blacklisted. So to be blacklisted means you can't work, you can't do your job. And so a lot of filmmakers and people in that industry were blacklisted because they just refused to admit anything. Okay. So some of the people who are targeted, I'm gonna just show you these. Walt Disney. So why would Disney be targeted? He connects with a bunch of kids and people through his work. Okay, and so but he's a target. Now Walt Disney was really on the other end of things. If you look into his history, he wasn't the best guy. All right. Ronald Reagan, who was one of our presidents, he was suspected of being a communist, which is ironic because he's the one who ultimately ends the Cold War and takes down communism. But prior to his career in politics, he was an actor. And so with him being in films, he was looked at for being a part of communist activity. Martin Luther King, he was accused of being a communist sympathizer because of his work. That was just another way of the FBI trying to take him down. And then our author, our playwright, Arthur Miller, he's also suspected of being a communist because of his work. All right. Now, again, I mentioned this a couple times already. So an allegory is a work of literature that tells one story on the surface while referring to another subtextually. So the Crucible is an allegory for the Red Scare. Okay. So we get one story on the surface, so you could read this just as a story of the witch trials, but all in all, it's an allegory for the Red Scare. All right. So, again, remember, it's late in the afternoon on a Friday. I'm tired. So, remember to complete the Edpuzzle. It is for a quiz grade. If you have to go back and look at some of these things a couple times to get the answer, that's your prerogative. Okay? So make sure you're getting this done. Hopefully you got something out of this. We'll see you soon.